Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. A big thank you to everyone that's taken time out and come along this morning. On behalf of myself and the team, we really appreciate all of you giving up an hour of your time this morning. My name's Mark Cowlin. I'm a director here at Org, and today we're joined by a panel of 5 experts: Rob Lanham, Anne Piskellen, David Core, Tony Wilson and Nancy McCall, who are all well recognised within the UK payments industry. Specifically this morning, we're focusing on the incoming ISO 20022 standard. We're here to help you work out what's important and where you need to focus. There seems to be such an ever-growing amount of regulatory change and industry initiatives in payments now, and it can be difficult to keep up. How can small and mid-tier financial institutions especially work out what is important and see the wood through the trees, regardless of size? All financial institutions need to conform to payments regulations or risk their very existence. However, when your organisation doesn't have a dedicated payments industry expertise, how do you address what we see as the 3 main challenges? Identifying the relevant parts of the regulation, 1, understanding the changes and timelines, secondly, and finally assessing the impact on the organisation. So this morning we're looking to address that and help you navigate through that path and ultimately shed some light on those very things in relation to ISO 20022. Before we go into the presentation and onto the panel, I'd like this, and we'd like this to be as interactive with you as we can. So feel free to use the chat option to ask any questions or raise any questions, and we'll look to have a Q&A session at the end before we have a wrap up. One of my colleagues, Mark Asprey from our sister firm, Morgan McKinley, will be hosting that. Okay, great. So let me hand you over to our panel and our first page of the slide deck, please. Rob, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everybody. So what is ISO 20022 and why is it important? So the background to ISO 20022 is to provide a comprehensive representation of financial services business models in respect of the actors in a transaction, their roles and responsibilities, and the various information requirements. And as banks and other financial institutions migrate across to it, most of the conversations about old versus new, big versus small, incumbents versus innovators are likely to be built around the standardization of language and messaging for payments data that it represents. The push for common standards is significant across private and public sectors. Governments, corporates, banks seeking to address some of the challenges and the shortcomings of domestic and cross-border payments. And by standardizing the structure and content of payments messaging and including more information in the messages themselves, ISO 20022 will improve the speed, efficiency, and the security of payments. Now, in the UK, the replacement of the real-time gross settlement system underpinning CHAPS is already underway, being led by the Bank of England. And at the same time, the retail systems, including BACS and faster payments, are going to be migrating to the new payments architecture, which is currently being led by Pay UK, and I know my colleague Anne's going to talk a little bit more about that on her slides. We'll cover some of the timings and the challenges to those on the next slide, but ISO 20022 has actually been around for 15 years, so it's not really a big surprise to the biggest players. But banks haven't necessarily been slow to adopt it just because of the challenges of their legacy systems, but it's only recently become mandatory, and there wasn't really a clear competitive advantage to be a first mover and justify the changes which are going to be necessary to to a bank's internal architecture or a firm's internal architecture, and Nancy will talk about those later in the presentation. But in essence, there are four reasons that it's important. The first one is you've got to do it. It's mandatory. It's initially going to be mandatory through scheme rules, and these will, in fairly short order, then be technically enforced. Secondly, new entrants to the market are already building their platforms to be ISO 20022 ready, and that's potentially going to give them a competitive advantage to those who hang around. The new content and standardized message structures are going to open up new opportunities to improve both the payment experience and to improve the banks and firms handling of those messages. So faster, more accurate processing, better quality automated decision making. And finally, I think it's going to be all about customers, because as new offerings that leverage this standard become more prevalent, customers are going to come to expect the sort of experiences, the more seamless and value-added experiences that are going to be offered. So let's talk a little bit more about what we know about timescales. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in the UK, there are three main drivers to this. The Bank of England's new RTGS system, the changes to SWIFT, and the changes to the retail payment systems. So over the coming year, we're expecting more consultations and market guidance to be published. Certainly by sort of end of Q2, I think we're expecting the first ones to land, or possibly sooner. The bank has been quite clear that they don't intend to publish any more policy papers, so their schemas and the direction of travel is already set. And what that means is that from June next year, all direct chaps participants will be able to send and receive like for like ISO 20022 messages. So like for MT103s and MT202s. They won't be able to use the enhanced message data. However, from February 2023, all direct participants must be able to receive the must be able to receive enhanced messages. They'll be able to send them, but they won't be mandated to send them. And then from 2024, sending of using mandate the enhanced messages is going to be mandatory, and in particular this is around purpose codes and legal entity identifiers. The bank is migrating to its new core ledger and settlement engine September 2023, and so that is, if you like, the an underlying driver for why these dates are pretty much set in stone now. In parallel, SWIFT has already announced its timetable, and I think the key piece there is November 2025. So some key MT messages, MT 100s, 200s, and 900s are going to be decommissioned come November 2025. Now, there's a high degree of confidence in those timetables, or in that part of the timetable. Where there is less clarity is around the retail scheme new payments architecture replacement. And Anne, would you be okay to speak about that? If I can hand over to you now, please.
Thank you, Rob, and morning, everyone. So we've got the what we call the dependent on the MPA design and procurement timeline in lovely salmon on this slide. And the reason being is because we couldn't really understand whether it was actually red or bright red. The reason as well is, as you're aware, the design of the MPA was handed over and suggested by the PSR. And that was handed over approximately about 3 years ago to the pay.uk. Now, what we need to understand is obviously you are trying to transition the retail scheme, so BACS and faster payments. And BACS has been around for over 50 years. You've got faster payments, which is also built on a different standard to BACS. And then they were also trying to do ICS into one very simple settlement layer with overlay services. And they now realise how complex that is, particularly around direct debits. As anyone has read the BACS scheme rules will know how complex they are. So progress really with the MPA and the procurement of the actual infrastructure has been very slow, and it's really not clear as to how that will progress. Many of you will have seen that the PSR have actually got their consultation out, and the dates for responding on that are the end of this week for the first part of that. And that relates to the procurement elements and their questions around the perceived risks that they have on this project of actually the procurement taking place and not providing value for money. They also say that the present arrangements, they believe, are stifling competition and innovation in the payment service, and they think that it may delay realisation of the benefits. So this is the great unknown. And I think what we need to do is understand that this will not become clear for a few months hence. So you've got to have that in the back of your mind. However, what you should take away from today is whatever emerges from that process, it will be built on ISO 20022 as the message standard. Now, Rob actually mentioned that ISO 20022 has been around for a long number of years. And I can tell you that the current account switch service and the cash ISO transfer service were already built on those new standards. So they're not new to the existing banks. And they are a workable set of standards that can actually be delivered to actually provide additional benefits. The existing services may run in parallel, but note that Standard 18 mapping to ISO 20022 has already been completed. That was done approximately 4 years ago. So it's a really key point that is actually, it is doable and it's expected to be actually completed very soon. So let's go back. The PSR consultation is out. The date for responses on the first element of that is actually the 19th of March. So if you're wanting to do anything on that, you need to get your skates on. The other thing I just mentioned on this part is if you are a DD user, just think about that. Obviously, DD is very complex, and DD users consider that actually direct debit has not been touched for the last 3 years. So whilst all of these discussions have been taking place, there's been no development in the direct debit or direct credit or even faster payments products. So therefore, what you need to think about is actually what that means for your own products. And that's why we would say you need to consider how you look for your future, what it means for your future products going forward. The other last thing I'd mention from a regulatory point of view is that the PSR are also consulting on APP scans, obviously from a faster payments perspective, and also customer protections. So all of this will be holistic and it will impact on your own customer propositions going forward. So change is coming, and I'd like to go to the next slide. So as I say, change is coming. Now, I'm old enough to remember the last transition when we actually transitioned back from the old engine onto the new engine and to actually brought VocaLink into the fold. And at that time, it was very much on the basis that we wanted to ensure that what we built in the new environment wouldn't just replace like for like. And this is why the Bank of England's been very, very clear. They've done a lot of work with a lot of stakeholders and they've consulted widely. And this is one of the bank's actual owned slides, and it's showing that they believe that there are a range of benefits that ISO 20022 will provide, mainly around process and insight improvements, offered by the additional information included with the payment. They also say that integration with other business processes will lead to simplification and error avoidance. And it also offers potential for resilience through alternative routing of payments. This is when you have to think about when the NPA does come in, then you do have that ability to swap payment schemes if there's an event of an issue. Fraud is one area where additional information should help. And we've been doing a lot of work with the fraud community as it's more effective and will minimize the cost of doing so. But the challenge for everyone is to understand how the benefits can be realized. A balance of cooperation and competition obviously is required. And to understand the opportunities, you need to understand the full impact of the changes across the payments system. I'm now going to hand over to Nancy, and she's going to look at it from a more specific area. Nancy?
Thanks, Anne. Could I have the next slide, please, Simon? Morning, everyone. As we've heard so far, the impacts of ISO 20022 are quite wide-ranging, and I wanted to bring it down and make it a little bit more specific to what it might mean for your organisation. And I've chosen the retail payments journey to talk through. So ISO 20022 brings new data into the payment flows, a different technical payment flow, and also allows for different data such as enhanced characters and structured addresses. So if you have a think on the retail payments journey, the customer wants to initiate a payment. So that might be done through mobile channels, online banking, telephony. So with different data requirements, screens will have to change at the front end of your systems. Also, the validation rules that are required to support that. That may also link through to your call centres. Will you need new scripts, new screens, new processes there? And similarly, your back office payments processing. That data also, when customers have received payments, you'll want to display information of that back to your customers. So it's not just the initiation of the payments in the front end channels that will need to change, but also potentially what you display back to customers. In the engine of any organisation are the systems of record and the main systems. They will have to change to cope with new data and databases, different validation rules, different types of data being stored. So you need to consider whether your systems are capable of those changes. Also, the enhanced data could give benefits to your MI and reporting suites, and also, as Anne mentioned, enhanced capabilities in fraud and EML. So if you're planning significant system changes over the next few years, please do bear in mind that the ISO 20022 changes are coming, and that may feed into some of the decisions you make around how to change those systems. With any payments project, transmission of payments is the key. And with the introduction of ISO 20022 for RTGS, for CHAPS in SWIFT, and also for the domestic payment schemes, how payments are transmitted is going to change. We've also seen with the introduction of confirmation of payee that the way forward is to use overlay services rather than everything being centralised and standardised in the middle. So there's a lot of new things to get used to as the systems change and the whole banking industry, financial services moves across to ISO 20022. But also don't forget about your settlement and reconciliation areas. The timelines for settlement may change. And if they do, that could have an impact on your treasury function and your liquidity models. And that, in summary and finally, may feed also into your finance and rec system. So every point of the the payments journey could be impacted by the change to ISO 20022. But nobody knows all the answers yet, and some of them will take time and maybe come out slowly over the next few years. So what can you do now to make sure you understand the regulations, you work out the impact to your organisation, and have a strategy for moving forward and complying with the payments regulations? I would put forward that the key to doing this successfully is to have a structured approach. Simon, could I have the next slide, please? So the structured approach that we would recommend is these 7 steps that you see on this slide. First of all, and most importantly, is education. I mean, to make sure that your organisation gains an understanding of the changes that are coming and the current timelines. There's a lot of information freely available from the payment schemes and from UK Finance. And you may want to use external expertise to help you interpret what the changes are going to mean. The most important thing is that your organisation has an opinion of what you want to do. The second step is, and this leads back to the slide we've just seen of the journey. It's important to prepare an inventory of all the systems and processes throughout your organisation and the people impact of what will be impacted by the changes. And then to analyse the amount of change required for each system and process and areas that will be impacted, and indeed whether those systems are capable of change. From then, it's important to work out your organisation's strategy and how you want to address the changes, bearing in mind the size of your organisation, your business drivers, and also to consider at this point, are there any business or commercial opportunities that will arise from being able to adopt richer data, a new way of processing payments? And that should all feed into a delivery roadmap where you schedule, probably over a number of years, how you're going to implement your strategy and adhere to the regulatory timelines. A very important consideration will be to keep your executive team appraised of what's happening and let them know that they will have to dedicate a reasonable amount or a fair amount of investment funding over the next few years. And they'll need to understand and consider how that fits in with the overall business plan for the organisation. And as we've seen already, it's a bit of shifting sands of the information coming out from the industry and the regulators. So please make sure that you keep yourselves up to date of the changes in specifications or timelines or approaches. So I'd like to hand over now to Mark Asbury, who will lead our question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy, and to the rest of the panel. That's given everyone a really good insight into the changes that are coming up around ISO 20022. As Mark mentioned earlier, my name is Mark Asbury. I'm one of the Associate Directors at Morgan McKinney. I look after the Projects Change and Transformation Division. We're now going to do a quick, short Q&A session. So thanks to people who've sent in their questions. So first question, why can't we just use translation services to take away the costs and upheaval? That's to Anne and Nancy.
I'll start with this, shall I? I mean, to be honest with you, yes, you can have translation services, but the Bank of England is very clear that actually to ensure that you get the benefits of this transition to the new messaging service, they really don't want to have translation services out there. And let's think about the benefits, because when we did the transition from the BACS old engine to the new engine, as I mentioned before, we never actually took the opportunity to reduce the number of reports or actually understand how we could use that additional data to ensure that we had end-to-end processing that provided us with through reconciliation and non-repudiation of the actual payment message. So the Bank of England is actually looking back into history and saying, look, we've had these opportunities before, but we've never actually taken the opportunity to realise the benefits. This time, you've had time to consider that you will have this change coming over. Europe are also using this new messaging service. So therefore, we are saying to you that we do not expect translation services to be part of your business case. However, I'm going to pass over to Nancy so she can expand on that from a proposition perspective.
Thanks, Anne. While many suppliers will be coming to talk to you and offering translation services, and it may look quite attractive, as Anne said, ultimately, to get the full benefits, then you need to stick with the standards as they are. However, what you also need to consider is, if you go down the translation services route, yes, there will be cost involved, but what you're missing out on is the richness of data coming back to your organisation, whether that be unique transaction reference numbers or purpose codes or information that you can use in your AML systems. And as ISO 20022 becomes more accepted and used widely across financial services industry in the UK, are you going to be at a disadvantage by not having the richness of data in your organisation? If a customer calls up with a reference number that their bank provided them with, but you can't see that, how are you going to address their query? Also, if the standard for AML has risen and is using all the richness of data, and your systems can't use that, are you more at risk from fraud? So please consider the longer term strategy as well, and maybe not just the expedient, the easiest, quickest, cheapest way of doing this is to adopt translation services. So lots to think about there. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks very much, Nancy. And our next question, with so much information available, what are the best ways to keep up to date with developments? Rob, Nancy, do you think that would be one for you to answer potentially?
I'll start off on this one. As I said earlier, Google is a wonderful thing. The scheme websites provide lots of interesting information. UK Finance also is good. Those would be my first ports of call. Anne, you're closer to some of the industry working groups.
And I think, Nancy, you've said it in best 2 to 3 ways. There are a myriad ways of actually in which you can keep up to speed with developments. And the reason being is this is a complex environment. As I've said earlier, the PSR are actually consulting on the MPA. The PSR are actually the regulator that's responsible for collaboration, innovation and competition within the payment sector. So the PSR website is probably one that you should keep an eye on, and their response, and once they've done this consultation, obviously what they publish as their results. However, that will be too late for you. So again, this is around actually understanding how you can best get your view put into this arena. Because otherwise what will happen is you will get something that's delivered that may not suit your own business processes.
Thank you very much, Anne. Next question. Lots of fintechs are offering new payments products. What's your view on them, to Nancy?
I think that there's a couple of points here. One is, what is the product that the fintech is offering? Is it a whizzy new way of initiating a payment that ultimately goes through the standard payment rails at the back end? Or is it replacing a different way of making a payment completely that bypasses the payment rails? So you first of all need to establish which of those it is. If it's the latter, as in a completely different way of making payments, then you need to consider whether that provider offers the security, resilience and scale to be able to process your payments safely for your customers. But ultimately, it's your choice the way you want to go. But to me, the three key questions are around security, resilience and scale of the fintech.
Thank you.
I just add in there as well, Nancy, I think it's one of the things we alluded to as well is actually the opportunities that enhanced data over the coming years is going to offer them. And you run the risk of those fintechs owning your customers. If they're leveraging that data, they will know more about your customer base than you do. You know, there's a huge missed opportunity there. And I think it comes back to the point Nancy made, which is just really understanding, you know, what are your use cases and not just, okay, we've got to do this. Well, if we've got to do this, what can we do if we just do a little bit more thinking about implementation to see where we can enhance our competitive advantage? So I think that's the real opportunity is what you can do with this extra data now that it's going to be in a far more usable form.
Thanks very much, Rob. Next question. In regards to increased efficiency and straight-through processing, what examples can you provide in terms of how this is achieved in ISO 20022 that MT messaging does not provide today? Who would like to answer that question?
I can take that from a retail perspective. So, sorry, let's go back to retail. So we used, when I was at BACS for the current account switch service, we used ISO 20022. And the use of that actual additional messaging element enabled us then to build the service that was more efficient, enabled straight-through processing, and also enabled us to be more competitive because we were able to actually offer it to more users to become direct participants in that service. So we were able to address fraud issues up front as well. So it really made the service more efficient and cost effective for other users to come on board. So that's really in the retail perspective. So if you then think about that, this is what we're saying when it goes into the CHAPS perspective, then obviously then you've got those benefits that would be taken across.
Thanks, Dan. Next question. Hold on a sec. Why do you think the impact of PSR consultation on the MPA will be? What do you think the impact will be on the PSR consultation on MPA will be? Sorry. And that's to Anne and David.
Shall I answer that? So there's one of the reasons for the introduction of the payment systems regulator was as an economic regulator to understand how competition could best be introduced into the payments area. Interestingly, since the PSR was launched, there have been a significant number of new entrants particularly into retail banking, and a growing range of offerings for the small business sector. As Nancy's implied, a lot of their work are not around the core payments elements, but rather around the overlay services. And that's a model that I think the PSR will want to develop, but it still hasn't answered the central question about what the best model for provision of the clearing and settlement engine for the services are. We're in a slightly odd situation where the infrastructure itself is now owned by one of the card schemes. And they, of course, themselves are subject of considerable debate around how competitive they are with each other and the services they provide. So I think the outcome of the consultation that's currently underway will be very interesting to see what decisions are made. But certainly our experience, getting the balance right between understanding the products and services such as direct debit, direct credit, and what faster payments can underpin as services is separate from the actual technology infrastructure. I'm not sure that we've got a clear answer on what the best model is yet.
Thank you, David, for that. Last question, I believe, unless any more come in. How likely are the timescales to move? This is potentially for Rob and Anne.
Well, Van, I'll take the easy part, and then I'll throw over the bit about retail schemes to you. The timescales are very unlikely to move. They've already moved backwards about 6 months or so due to COVID, and certainly over the next probably 2 to 3 years, I don't think we're likely to see any significant changes, certainly under the banks, the RTGS replacement and SWIFT. However, I think what's going to happen is, as we move forward over the coming months, we'll start to get that. We'll start to sort of see the roadmap starting to be laid down in more detail, and we'll start to understand what additional schemas are going to be dropping in at later dates. So, you know, the bank has said, for example, they're not going to mandate enhanced data at the schema level before the end of 2025. So, you know, over the next 12 to 24 months, structure projects. So, well, you know, if you've only got perhaps 2 to 3 years of notice, you know, you need to be starting to think hard now. And I think you can probably expand a bit on the retail piece, which is I think the big unknown at the moment.
I mean, as we said, the PSR is an economic regulator, and they've got to look at the economies of the infrastructure provision for the retail payments. However, what we should stand back and say, actually, for the last 3 years, this product has not been invested in and it's been stagnated. So therefore, if you've got direct debit and direct credit, you've got 6 billion transactions going through per annum, and those end users have not had any investment in that product whatsoever. I say that because it's obviously was one of my products that I was managing whilst I was actually at BACS. I think that the reason that the PSR have actually gone out for consultation is because they're very serious that something needs to be done, and needs to be done very quickly. And I think the fact that they've said that there are unacceptable high risks in the current NPA programme publicly shows their commitment to getting something moving. I think obviously I mentioned earlier, there's the risk they're bringing out is that they don't believe the existing programme provides value for money, and they're concerned about competition and innovation. And this is around actually understanding where we're going with the market as a whole. So if you look at the way that open banking is beginning to open up and the products that are being built on that, they're using the faster payments product at the end of this. And yes, we have confirmation of pay, which is an overlay service, but the risk of fraud is actually ever increasing. So I think if you then bring that back, then the PSR needs to look holistically at the provisions of the infrastructure that allow continued growth in open banking, but actually provides, as Nancy said, a service that continues to provide resilience and actually remains on the forefront of the world's faster payments products. So if we go back to the original question, I don't think that the PSR will allow this project to continue to drift. And what you will see over the next few months are some significant decisions being made. How that then looks in practice of delivery may be slightly different to what we are seeing at the present time. But I think it's one definitely to keep close to.
Thank you very much, Rob and Anne. I think that's all the questions. So thanks to everyone who sent them in, and for the panel answering them. Now I'm just going to pass you to Nancy, who's going to talk about, I guess, org and how potentially we can help you plan for this change.
Thanks, Mark. Could I have the next slide, please? Thanks. We're focused today on ISO 20022 changes, but org's payments team can provide information and guidance on many more aspects of the payments industry and programme delivery. We understand that not all organisations have a team of dedicated resources, as the big banks do, to follow all the twists and turns of payments regulations and find out what the latest papers are or when they're coming out. So please talk to org to see how we can help you to give you access to what we're calling a virtual in-house payments team, where we could maybe provide that expertise and that guidance for you. Thanks. I'd like to hand back to Mark Cowlin, please.
Thank you, Nancy. A big thank you to everybody this morning and our panel in particular. I just wanted to say, everyone that's been part of the webinar today will receive a copy of today's slides. So please keep an eye out for that in your inbox. If anyone has any questions or would like to book, as Nancy alluded to, maybe a follow-up call with one of our partners to discuss anything that you've seen today, please reach out to either myself or Mark Asprey at Morgan McKinley. I mean, I've not spoken about org, and it's probably a good time to maybe tell you a little bit about org, and I appreciate not everyone's heard of org, so just a quick minute on that. We opened our doors in late summer of 2020. Org occupies that middle ground between consulting and staffing. And we want to be the absolute when it comes to delivering the best consulting, resource solutions, or blend of the two, depending on what you need at the time. I guess, simply put, we advise, resource, and can help you deliver transformational change across your organisation. And with ISO 20022, that's a big part of change. And just really very quickly, at our centre, we have three core practice areas. So technology is one, things like cloud data, ERP, process excellence, which is mainly focused around technology operating model design, process improvement and outsourcing, and of course, people, culture. With an extensive bench of associates, we can help you ramp up or down as quickly as you need, depending on what you're doing. So thank you again for everybody coming along, and we've finished well within time, so everyone can get back to their days as from straight away as 9 o'clock approaches. On behalf of everyone here at org and Morgan McKinley, thank you, and we look forward to catching up with you all very soon. Have a good day.